Hello, Worldview listeners. I want to take a moment and give a shout out to my friend Luke and his team at increasecreative.co. This season of our podcast, Luke has been helping his team there to produce the content that I hope that's been a blessing and encouragement to you. It's been a help to me to have his behind the scenes work, and I want to give him a shout out and let you guys know about his company. Increasecreative.co is a great partner for you to consider for powerful church communication. Luke's team can create custom websites, compelling graphic designs. They help with original video and, as you've noticed, original podcast content. It allows people like you, people like me, to connect with our communities. So I'd encourage you to let them handle the creative aspect of what you need help with so you can focus on your mission. Take a moment, visit increasecreative.co to learn more about how Luke can help you. That's increasecreative.co.
Welcome to Worldview, a podcast featuring teaching and conversations with Dr. Mike Lester that focus on helping faithful disciples develop a biblical worldview. Thanks for joining us, and here's your host, Mike Lester.
Well, hello there, friends, and welcome to another episode here of Worldview. I'm your host, J. Michael Lester. This season, we've been looking at the concept of how to lead when the path isn't clear. We've called them Red Sea moments. We've talked about difficult moments. We've talked about crises. We've talked about the feeling of being overwhelmed. We're trying to take that moment that is experienced by every leader, and rather than approaching it emotionally, becoming trapped in the paralysis of analysis, we're trying to develop a framework by which we can make decisions in difficulties, and a framework we can hand over to others and help to equip them to do the same. Our three-step process that we have been looking at, the three phases, the three movements of this decision journey, we've said as stage one, understanding the difficulty. Stage two is deciding the next step. We'll finish that stage today. And then as we move into the next episode, we'll start stage three. How do we communicate this decision to go forward when the path isn't clear with those that we're leading? How do we help them get on board? How do we help them take the journey with us? It's not enough for us to wrestle with a decision in times of difficulty and lack of clarity and then make a decision. That's not enough. We have to bring people with us, or else we're not leading. And these three movements, if you will, are broken down into 10 steps. And we have discussed now 6 of them. We'll come to step 7 today. By way of review, we have encouraged you to assess the situation. Like the famous Dragnet TV show back in the 60s, just the facts. Not the emotion, not the what ifs, not the worst case scenarios, not the overwhelming, crushing lack of clarity, but just what are the facts? Gather them so that we truly know the situation. Step 2, understand the big picture. Rather than getting caught up in this forest of insurmountable odds, step back a little bit, see the big picture. Rather than staring at a gigantic tree that blocks the way, remember that God has been leading you faithfully on a journey for quite some time. And God knows where he's going. And God knows how to get you to where he needs you to be. And so see the big picture. Recognize this isn't the first time you've experienced a difficult decision or a leadership point where the path forward doesn't seem clear. So we've talked about that. And then the third step we've talked about is just identifying that limiting fear. That fear that threatens to hold you back. That fear that keeps you from going forward. As we moved into stage 2, we looked at step number 4, surrounding ourselves with this support team. Wise counselors, with a little bit of a caution and a caveat that we don't count counselors. They're not all equal. We weigh them. Sometimes we will have counselors giving us conflicting pieces of information. What do we do when that happens? We talked about walking in the light that we already have, taking the next step, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, just taking the next step, moving forward. John likens this when he writes his epistles, 2nd and 3rd John. He says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. Walking. Paul uses the expression walking in light. We talk about the Christian life being a journey. It's sometimes it's called a race. Sometimes it's we're walking in something, but it's always forward motion. We're not standing in the truth. We're not sitting in the truth. We're not waiting in the truth. Walk in the light that you have. And step 6 was what we just covered in our previous episode. Trust God, even when you don't understand, even when it doesn't make sense, even at times when it may seem to go against the wise counsel you've heard. We talked about some examples of that. Those are exceptions, but they do happen. We have to be prepared for it when they do. As we move into step 7 today, and we come to the conclusion of the second stage of the journey, deciding the next step, today's episode deals with step 7. Just do it. Just do it. And then own the decision. Just do it and own it. Therein lies the trap. Sometimes we hedge our bets, but we're going to talk about as leaders, not hedging our bets, not looking for a way out in case the decision doesn't go the way we hope, but making the decision and then owning it. Dwight Eisenhower made this statement in his inaugural address from 1953. The history of free men is never really written by chance, but by choice. Their choice. He was talking to a nation about the power of decisions and making the right ones, making the right choice. By way of just maybe an illustration to get this conversation started, I love going back into history and finding how the principles that we're discussing in this season are fleshed out and illustrated for us perfectly in some of the crucial moments on the world stage. One of those is June 5th, 1944. It's cold night. It's a cold night. It's a tense moment. If you talk about leading when the path isn't clear, this night is cloaked in uncertainty. The Allied leaders had spent months preparing for what would become known as Operation Overlord, an invasion so massive that if it were successful, it would be able to turn the entire tide of World War II. But if it failed, the cost would be catastrophic. It's a high risk, high reward moment. At the center of this crucible, at the center of the fulcrum point where the decision must be made, stands one man, Eisenhower. Eisenhower, a man who in just 9 short years will discuss to the American people as president about the power of choice. Days had come and gone with General Eisenhower receiving reports and listening to them. They were conflicting. The weather was deteriorating. As the winds began to rise and as they continued to rise, visibility began to decrease and collapse. It's obviously not an ideal situation for what will become known as D-Day. His own commanders are divided. There's no unanimous decision here on what should be the call. What play are we making? Some believed that they needed to delay the invasion. Others believed that if they delayed it, it would doom the mission entirely. Thousands of paratroopers, thousands of them, were already airborne. They were already en route. What do you do with that? Knowing that this is happening, knowing that there are people already in motion. How do you handle that? And so, with this in mind, Eisenhower continued to gather information. The invasions that he was trying to plan, he realized that it was time for a final decision, and it was his to make. Every eye is looking at him. It's a lonely position. that every leader eventually finds himself in. He is being expected to make a life-changing, nation-changing, world-changing decision. And the path isn't clear. So Eisenhower walked out of the room, looked out into the storm, looked into the English Channel and the churning waters that were there, then went back to the room where the Allied command sat nervously in silence, waiting for their commander to make a decision. Obviously, the tension was palpable. You can't imagine the stakes ever being higher than what they were at this moment. No one would blame Eisenhower if he postponed the decision. No one would have questioned his cautious approach. But leaders aren't called to perpetual indecision. For Eisenhower, he understood that the moment for a final decision was now. It had come. He didn't give a long, rambunctious speech. It wasn't one of those let's win one for the giver type of moments. He spoke quietly, he spoke firmly, and these are the words that history records. Okay, let's go. 3 simple words. Launched the greatest amphibious invasion in history. The decision was made. It wasn't made perfectly. It wasn't made painlessly. But it was made decisively. We know now in hindsight how that story plays out, but there is a vignette to this story, this narrative that is often forgotten. There's a little nugget of principled truth here that reveals the true greatness of leadership. Simply put, Eisenhower owned the decision alone. In his pocket that day, he carried 2 statements. The first statement announced the invasion's success. The second, handwritten and hopefully never displayed to the public, assumed total responsibility if the mission failed. In that letter that he carried were these words: if any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. No hedging his bets. No, we thought we could do it even though the weather was adverse. We took into concern the high winds, but we thought there was no hedging. There was no partially blaming the weather or the winds. There's no blaming low visibility. There's no blame on his staff. There's no blame on the circumstances, no blame on the uncertainty. He owned the decision fully. And he said, I'm just going to do it. I've made the decision. I'm going through this process. I know the path isn't clear, but now it's time to make a decision. I'm going to make it and I'm going to own it. So history remembers D-Day, June 6, 1944, as a turning point of courage and sacrifice and faith and a mission that was larger than any one person. But long before victory was secured on the beaches of Normandy, it was forged in a quiet room where one leader did what all leaders must eventually do: make the hard call, make the hard decision, and own it. The world celebrates June 6, 1944, but leaders must remember June 5th, the time that the decision was made. And leadership will always eventually bring us to one of these moments like Eisenhower faced. He assessed, he saw the big picture, he knew the fears, he sought counsel, he was taking the small steps he knew he could, he was trusting the plan even when it didn't make sense. But there came this moment when he had to simply act. And then by the grace of God, own that decision faithfully and humbly. It's an interesting story, isn't it? I love these vignettes from history because it fleshes out principles that are not just theoretical. We can see proof of them in action. History also tells us a story of those moments of indecision that separates great leaders from others. Indecision is a bane of good leadership. Theodore Roosevelt provided sage advice for leaders at these crucial steps of making a decision and owning it. Here's what he said. In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing. I love that sentiment. The best thing you can do is the right thing. You can't do that. The next best thing to do is the wrong thing. The worst thing totally to do is just to do nothing. When you think about these great leaders, military or even corporate America, we understand that they feel the burden of command, of leadership. And in these moments, frankly, perfect clarity is an impossibility. What's needed is not clarity, but courage. Courage to make a decision and humility to own the consequences. Leadership at a core level always requires decisive action. At times, these decisions are fairly simple. The right thing is clearly evident. At other times, as we've been discussing on this season of the podcast, the path isn't always clear. These decisive actions require personal ownership, especially when success isn't guaranteed. We don't always have the liberty to say, well, when I have certainty or when I have peace, then I'll make the right decision. I've heard that sentiment more times than I can count. Sadly, I'm guilty of hiding behind that same pattern of thought as well. Perhaps you are also. The hard truth is, perfect clarity is often a mirage. So in our quest for certainty, the noble quest for certainty, we delay. We label it differently, though. We call it an abundance of caution. But I wonder how many times that abundance of caution is fear of getting it wrong. And now, to be clear, I'm not advocating we throw caution to the wind. I am for getting counsel. I am for having wise counsel. And I understand there's a place for caution. I get all of that. But I am reminding us that as leaders, no significant decision, whether it's life or ministry, come with perfect clarity. Faith leadership is never risk-free. So I guess the challenge is to learn how to distinguish between prudence and procrastination. I love Eisenhower's story because it shows us something. It shows us courage in the face of impossible circumstances. I love his story because the bravery he displays mirrors to us what Scripture repeatedly celebrates. The Bible is replete with stories of leaders who act in faith when the outcome is uncertain. I guess the one that comes to my mind first is 1 Samuel 14. It's Jonathan and his armor bearer, just two men climbing up a hillside, meeting a group of the enemy soldiers, unsure of the outcome, but walking in faith nonetheless. I love Jonathan not going to let that outcome, being unknown, keep him from being a decisive faith leader. He says to his armor bearer, it may be that the Lord will work for us. The faith that Jonathan displays is matched by his armor bearer, because he says in verse 7, do all this in your heart. Hey, look, I'm with you. Jonathan is saying, I'm going to do something. His armor bearer encourages him by simply saying, do it, just do it. No blame. Just a faith-filled, decisive leader who isn't sitting around waiting for perfect clarity. He knows it's the time to act. That same principle fleshes out again in Judges 4 with Deborah and Barak. Barak is waiting for clarity. He's waiting for perfect conditions. Deborah observes the situation and just simply decides to do the right thing right now. Going to the New Testament, Paul was determined to go to Jerusalem in Acts 21. And God sends to him the prophet Agabus. And Agabus prophesies that Paul will be bound and Paul will be handed over to the Gentiles. And so the people plead with Paul to heed the warning. Don't go to Jerusalem. But listen to Paul's answer. What mean you to weep? What mean you to break my heart? Listen, I'm ready to be bound right now. I am. And not only to be bound, I'm ready to die in Jerusalem. For the name of the Lord Jesus. If that's God's will, I'm ready for that. I don't know the outcome. You don't know the outcome. I just know we need to do something. We call it sometimes resolve, but sometimes it might border into stubbornness. I'm not sure. There's always a balance in these issues, isn't there? The church understood Paul's resolve, and they just simply asked that the Lord's will be done in the situation. Looking at Paul as a leader, he's not making decisions based out of fear. He's not making decisions based out of what brings him the most comfort. Warnings, while important, never negate God's calling. Paul's decisiveness is rooted in how he can best be a servant of the gospel, and he owned that decision, no matter what the consequence. If that's what God wants, if that's the consequences, okay. But I'm making the decision to follow God's call on my life. If you're a ministry leader, you know these passages that I'm referring to. If you're a history lover, no doubt you know the importance of D-Day and World War II. Knowing those truths is extremely helpful. The question still remains. Do you know the cost of indecision? You're stuck. You will continue in that stuck position until you make a decision. Ironically, indecision is still a decision. It is. It's still a decision. Just think through that. To not decide is the decision that you're making. As leaders, we have to understand that our decision to be indecisive comes with a cost. And we would do well to consider that cost. And ministry organizations, sometimes indecision can bring about mission drift. Indecision can cause us to move from being proactive to becoming reactive. Indecision, if we follow that route for too long, will erode eventually our credibility as leaders. And loss of credibility as a leader is catastrophic. And we can spend a lot of time discussing that as well. But there's another aspect to consider in this concept of the cost of indecision. Indecision exacts a cost not only upon us, there's also a cost it exacts upon those we lead. Have you ever thought about the fact, as a leader, your indecision causes anxiety for those who follow you? We might use the language of wisdom to try to mask that indecision. But what they're hearing is the language of fear. I think a biblical example of this is in that wilderness narrative for the children of Israel. We know that God has given them the land. The spies then bring back a report that was meant to sound like military wisdom. There are giants here. We don't have the means to conquer them. The counsel from the spies was to not conquer the land. That wasn't wisdom. That was fear. That indecision, rooted not in faith, but in fear, became their greatest regret. And it didn't just affect the 10 spies and their families. For 40 years, it affected an entire generation of the nation of Israel. Their faith and apprehension cost the young nation 40 years of waiting and wondering. God's plan, God's best for them, was delayed for 40 years because of a fearful, indecisive leadership. At a foundational level, decisions reveal our core values. They reveal our identity. Every choice we make is rooted in our value system. It's rooted in our callings. It's rooted in our convictions. It's rooted in our missional clarity. Decisions, or maybe even we could say indecisions, appropriately then function as test cases. If we keep avoiding a decision, it's time to ask the hard question. What fear? What fear is ruling me in this situation? What fear is keeping me stuck? What fear is causing me to delay to make this hard decision? And if we can break through that stuck position, the crisis, and move forward, then we can ask a different question. What values are guiding me, even though this is a difficult decision to make? In the story of Joshua, the nation of Israel is wavering, but he makes a value-driven decision. As for me, and as for my house, we will serve the Lord. Daniel does something similar as he's taken captive to Babylon. He understands, he discerns the plans that the king's deputized leadership have for him and the others. He figures this out. And so he makes a value-driven decision. No, I will not defile myself with the king's meat. I know leadership carries inherent risk, but I also know it brings great rewards. When momentum is strong, leadership feels easy. It's much easier to guide a moving ship than a stationary one. But when we feel stuck, paralyzed, as though we just can't take the next step forward, those are tough moments of leadership, but you can get through them. You can go forward. By the time you come to step 7 on this leadership journey, this decision journey, you don't need to keep finding more counselors. You've done that. They've already spoken into your life. You don't need to continually assess the situation. You've done that. You don't need to step back and see the big picture. You've done that. You don't need to identify the fears over and over. You've done that. You have the data, the information, the calling. You have everything you need to make the next step to go forward. You've followed this decision process already. Now it's time to obey the step that God has been illuminating for you. Just do it and own it. A leader who blames others loses his position quickly. I know our pride doesn't want to be wrong. Sometimes we feel that if we admit we are wrong, we'll lose the position of leadership. Actually, the truth of the situation is just the opposite. Our teams appreciate knowing that we're human and that we can at times be in error in our judgment and make mistakes. Yeah, granted, if we're making mistake after mistake after mistake, that's a separate problem. And that might be a qualification issue. But in general, a leader who admits when he's made a bad decision and owns it becomes more respected than the one who blames others. Spiritual leaders don't throw their support team under the proverbial bus. They don't wait to see if a decision succeeds or if it fails before they own it. They know that with the God-given position that they have as a leader, there's an expectation of accountability. So just do it. Own it. I'm thinking now of a story from King Saul's life. It's in 1 Samuel 13. Samuel comes to meet him. And though he's vested with authority as king, Saul has violated the word of the Lord. He's been expressly told what to do. Wait until Samuel arrives. But Samuel doesn't arrive according to Saul's preferred timetable. So Saul takes matters into his own hand. You know the story. He kills the sacrifice, offers it to the Lord, and it seems as when you're reading the story, almost immediately upon completing that act of rebellion, that act of sinful disobedience to the counsel and commands that he'd been given, Samuel comes on the scene. And Samuel confronts Saul. He confronted Saul often in the Old Testament. But when Saul is confronted by Samuel for his actions, Saul blames the people. Hey, Samuel, look, the people were scattering, and I forced myself because I knew that God wanted the people together. Look, that's bad leadership. Ownership of a decision builds trust. Blaming others erodes it. This cycle continues in Saul's life because just 2 chapters later, Samuel comes to Saul and says, "Have you obeyed the Lord? Have you done what you were commanded?" "Oh, absolutely. I have fully obeyed the Lord." "Okay. Then what is this bleating of the lambs I hear?" And Saul again defaults to the blame game. You see it in that story as well. It becomes his modus operandi. You know how the story of King Saul ends. It doesn't end well. He not only loses the right to rule over God's covenant people, he forfeits the right for his lineage to rule as well. I'm not saying he didn't accomplish good things for Israel. There are highlights in his leadership that can be pointed out. But hindsight being 2020, we don't typically remember Saul as a strong leader. Not because he couldn't make good decisions, but rather when he made bad decisions, he didn't take ownership of them. And in the final position of his life, that cost him greatly. I understand the dilemma. I'm sure you do too. It would be awesome if we could have peace before every difficult decision. Sometimes experience teaches us that peace comes after faithful obedience. We hesitate, believing that it will bring us clarity. Here's the irony, though. That hesitation often brings us just more confusion. There comes a moment of decision when you just have to do it and then own it and leave the results to the Lord. But this was the conclusion of the process of stage 2, making the decision. We've analyzed, we've surveyed, we've tried to understand fears, we've built a team that supports us. We have determined to trust God even when it doesn't make sense. We have decided we will walk in the light that we have been given, even if it's a small step. We've claimed that we are ready to follow God no matter what. We will make this decision. We will lead when the path isn't clear. Now it's time. Make that decision. And so I want to leave you with some practical steps as you think through of just do it. Just making a hard decision and then owning it. Practical observations. Our first one is this. Clarify the real decision you are avoiding. Sometimes that's a vision decision. Sometimes that's a hiring or a letting go decision. Sometimes it's a strategic decision. Sometimes it's an operational decision. There's a multitude, a plethora of ways that this decision fatigue can set in on us. There's many avenues by which the path may seem blocked and unclear. So whatever that path is, what is the real decision you are avoiding making? Because often when we delay a decision, there's a reason. Sometimes it's based in fear. Sometimes it's caused by confusion. At other times, maybe we are in this dilemma because we're people pleasers. I have this tendency. I like people to be happy. And there are just times when no matter what decision you make, someone is going to be offended. There is no decision on the table that will please everyone. And those are hard decisions, at least for me, because of the way I'm wired. Sometimes this decision is being avoided because we are perfectionists. And making imperfect decisions at imperfect times challenges us at the core of our identity. Sometimes we're avoiding the decision because we're emotionally exhausted and we just don't even have the mental strength to be decisive. Sometimes before we make a major decision, it may sound unspiritual, but it really isn't. Sometimes we just need to take a nap. But identify what's causing you to delay or avoid this decision. If it's fear, give it to the Lord. If it's confusion, trust your counselors. If it's a desire to please, remember you live for the audience of one. If you're borderline perfectionist and OCD, ask the Lord for courage to do the next right thing. If you're exhausted, get the rest you need. In fact, God models rest for us in the whole creation narrative. On the seventh day, God rested. So, practical takeaway, it's time to make a decision. You've been gathering data, you've been using spiritual terminology. I'm waiting for clarity, I'm waiting for peace, I'm gathering intel, I'm with my counselors. Okay, all that now, but now you're at the time to make the decision. And maybe there's fear, whatever, but clarify. Well, what is the real reason that you are not making this decision? What is the real decision you're avoiding? Number two, define success in biblical terms rather than circumstantial ones. There's a trap that's easy for ministry leaders to fall into of accepting the world's definition of success. Bigger is better, uh, or whatever mantra we choose. When a church's organizational life, its community life, drifts too far from being an organism to becoming an organization, a well-oiled machinery, we can allow the world's definition of success to overshadow our ministry. We can find our identity in the attendance numbers, the baptism numbers, the growing budgets, or whatever metric we choose that brings us pleasure. I'm humbled when I read Isaiah 6 because we often, at least if you challenge the next generation about giving their life to Jesus, we often just use part of the phrase. All right, Isaiah saw the Lord. And when he saw the Lord, here's what he heard. He heard God himself saying, "Who will go for me?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, Lord, send me. Will you be an Isaiah?" You can hear it preach. And then there's the rah-rah celebration. Here's another volunteer. Here's another servant. Go out and serve the Lord. You read the rest of the chapter. And God tells Isaiah, in effect, you will not see national revival. The people's heart is going to be hardened. They're not going to accept what you're going to preach. Isaiah will preach for nearly 60 years without revival. If I used some people's definition of success, Isaiah would be viewed as a failure. 60 years and no discernible difference? What are you thinking? I view Isaiah as a great success. Listen very carefully and very closely. Isaiah is a success. Isaiah is a success, not because of his fruit, but because of his faithfulness. God's definition of success is the only one that matters. Keep that in mind as you come to this point where it's time to make the decision. Thirdly, just a third practical takeaway, set a decision timeline. I'll pray about it. Oh, I'm waiting for the right season. I'm waiting for the right time to move forward. Let's just wait and see what God does. These can all sound spiritual, but all they're doing is punting the decision further down the road. It's not wrong to ask the Lord to make his will clear to you over the next 21 days or whatever you decide. Pray during that time, fast during that time, seek counsel during that time, read scripture during that time, listen for God's still small voice. But when the season of prayer has ended, move to the season of decision. Number 4, commit the decision to the Lord and communicate it to your counselors. By the time you've come to this point, you've not been carnal about taking the step. You've been stuck. You understand people are depending upon you for leadership. You feel like it's an impossible situation, but you sought the Lord. You've asked for wisdom, and God has promised to give it liberally. Now that the decision is made, commit the outcome to him. Communicate to your team as well, and then move forward by faith. Number 5, just another practical takeaway. Don't look back. Don't second guess the decision. We could say, don't be like Lot's wife. The context of her story isn't one of leadership, but the principle is there. She decided to leave Sodom. She second guessed that decision and looked back. And that was the end of her leadership journey. If we continually look to the past, we will never see the steps into the future. And a final takeaway. Take time to review what God has taught you leading up to this decision moment, this difficult journey of trying to lead when the path isn't clear. Now that you're moving forward, take the time to reflect. We live in a fast-paced world. It seems as though we can move from one event to the next. And it seems like what is crowded out of our schedules is time for reflection. But if we could pause for just a moment, we might observe that these stuck moments, these Red Sea moments, these difficult moments when the path doesn't seem clear, we might find it has a lot to teach us about ourselves and about God. I would challenge you to build in the habit of reflection. Now, look, I get it. As a leader, I get it. No leader enjoys being stuck. No leader enjoys standing at the Red Sea. No leader wants to make a bad decision and let people down. But I think we can at least understand by now that our indecision is a bad decision. The very thing we're trying to avoid. No leader has a perfect record. The leaders who inspire us, and we gloss over their weaknesses and we see their strengths because they so inspire us, but they don't bat 1,000. And they'll tell you that. But in our mind, we idolize them. We put them on a pedestal as though they've never made a mistake in leadership. They have. I promise you they have. Leaders who inspire us, they move forward even after they've made decisions that they regret. Make the decision. Own the consequences. This is the next step you need to take to go forward. I hope that challenges you and your leadership journey. If you're facing a difficult moment right now, I just remind you, you're not alone. You've been there probably before. You'll be there again. Others of us have been there. We understand where you're sitting. And Jesus knows exactly where you are. And he will lead you forward through this difficult set of circumstances. I look forward to moving into phase 3 of this leadership decision journey in our next episode. Until then, I pray that God blesses your ministry. I pray that God gives you courage to lead well. I pray that the people that God has entrusted to you and your stewardship, that those people, you would help them to go forward. Until next time, I'm your host, J. Michael Lester. This has been Worldview. I'll see you next time.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Worldview with Dr. Mike Lester. You can connect with Mike at jmichaellester.com, where you'll also find more discipleship resources. Mike also serves as the president of Veritas Baptist College, an online university dedicated to training ministry leaders virtually so that they can stay where God has called them. Learn more about Veritas at vbc.edu. This podcast is hosted by Dr. Mike Lester and produced by Luke Clayton and the team at increasecreative.co. We hope this episode has helped you grow in your journey of being a faithful disciple of Jesus. And we look forward to having you join us again right here on Worldview.